Welcome to another great, incredible episode of the Outlier Project Conversations with Legends series. We are very, very excited to have Jannell with us today. Before we get started, just quick housekeeping stuff. If you haven't transitioned over to Mighty Networks, make sure that you get on Mighty Networks. If you need any help or assistance, Kathy Leckie, who will wave, Kathy is more than happy to help you set up your profile. But it's a great way to register for events, to collaborate within the community, and to get all the information that's out there. Really good news. You guys know that we have the Outlier Project Cares, which is the philanthropic piece of our membership community. And we came up with something we think pretty cool to raise money. So Ken Landon created this beer, People Over Everything beer, that we are selling. And all the proceeds are going to the Joe Andruzzi Foundation. And we've raised in the last, I think 2 weeks, we've raised almost $3,000. Oh, wow. So I don't know if that means you guys really like beer or you really like to support Joe. But anyway, it's much, much appreciated for sure. So quickly, some things coming up. So this month we read Deliberate Discomfort by Jason Van Camp. Jason's going to be joining us on September 6th. To talk about Deliberate Discomfort. It's a phenomenal book, one of my favorites. We're following that up with Kristine Lilly. Kristine Lilly is a soccer Hall of Famer, two-time Olympic gold medalist, two-time World Cup champ. Her book, Powerhouse, is great. She's going to be joining us on October 4th. And then we have Iman Obu, who wrote the book, little glary there, called The Glass Ledge. She's amazing, molecular biologist, who then became Miss New York, who then became the CEO of Sway Media. So to say that she's fairly accomplished would be an understatement, but this book is tremendous. So we've got Iman coming up as well. In terms of our Legends series, we've got some cool stuff. Colin O'Brady is a 10-time world record holder. A lot of people know him as the first person to ever traverse Antarctica solo and unaided. He wrote a book called The Impossible First, which was a New York Times bestseller. And he just published The 12-Hour Walk, which is such a cool concept. So Colin is joining us on the 12th, which is a Monday. So we normally don't do things on Monday, but we wanted to get Colin in and to accommodate his schedule, it's going to be on the 12th. We are following that up with Chris Schembra. He wrote the bestseller Gratitude and Pasta. He's joining us on the 20th. And then we have an all-time legend, Joe Foster, the founder of Reebok, joining us on October 11th. So for those of you, I think there might be one or two people that have not been on a call before. The format is Jannell and I are going to talk for about 30 minutes or so, and then we're going to pass it over to you guys for live Q&A. So all you need to do is drop in the chat, just say, hey, I've got a question. You don't have to put your question in the chat, and Kathy will let me know and we'll tee you up and you can talk directly to Jannell. So before I introduce Jannell, Kathy, can you get us started?
I've got that lightning inside me, son of a god. I'm like a titan that's rising, oh, just you watch. I'm stepping into fate. There is no time to waste. I've got that lightning inside me. This is how legends are made.
Jannell, welcome. We are super excited to have you. And I love that picture with the action figure. So cool.
I have one behind me on my shelf here. I am super excited to be here. To Scott, thank you for having me. And I love seeing all these smiling faces, and I'm really excited to dive in and answer some questions.
Awesome. So let me introduce Jannell. Jannell is a human performance and mindfulness specialist. She's a former Air Force pilot. She was in the Air Force for 20 years. Her husband is also a longtime Air Force veteran. She's a combat veteran. Her TEDx talk is awesome. So you've got to check that out. She's the co-creator of Warrior Edge with Coach Pete Carroll, who coached the Seahawks to a Super Bowl, and Dr. Michael Gervais, who's also a legend. We'll have to have Michael on one of these days. So she's done amazing things. Both her and her husband have recently, well, I'd say somewhat recent, transitioned out of the military and are doing wonderful things. So it is an absolute blessing to have you. Thank you so much for carving out your time.
Absolutely. My pleasure to be here.
So I have so many questions for you. But let's start. There's not a lot of, I just got to be friendly with Mace Curran, who's wonderful. And I think I made an intro to you guys, but there's not a lot of female pilots in the Air Force. And I'm always curious, you know, I know the answer. I know that when you were 7, I think your dad had a prediction, and that turned out to be right. Tell us a little bit, how did you wind up with this long and illustrious military career?
Yeah, so I have kind of a little bit of a unique story and a unique path to how I got to where I am today. But yeah, it started when, as you alluded to, my dad, and I distinctly remember being about 7 years old, and my dad we'd meet strangers in different spaces of our life. And anytime he had the opportunity to kind of brag on me to a stranger, he would say things like, my daughter's going to grow up and be a submarine warfare commander or a combat pilot. And this was the 1980s when women actually couldn't do those types of jobs. But I didn't know that, right? I kind of grew up, and his goal was to inspire me to do or be anything I wanted, regardless of whether society was putting barriers on it or not. You know, I didn't really grow up in a space where I thought that there were limits on what I could achieve, which is very powerful for a young girl. And I think it's a great lesson. And, you know, I work in mindset with a lot of people. And when we're young, it's hard for us to see what our future could hold. And so part of our job as mentors and leaders and parents is to help protect the dreams of our children, right? And kind of help cultivate this sense of dreaming big and setting a goal, knowing that hard work and grit. And I talk about that in my TED talk. My dad did instill that these things weren't going to be easy, right? If I did want to accomplish great things in my life, if I wanted to do challenging things, I was going to have to work hard. I was going to have to be determined. You know, that's part of the equation. The part that I felt like I grew up without a little bit was shaping the right mindset for that in a deliberate way, right? Like, how do I train my mind to prepare me to do these hard and difficult things? So that's kind of like how I was set on this trajectory. You know, my parents really helped me in the beginning. I understood that it would require a lot of work and dedication, and I was willing to put in the effort, right? Nothing in life is easy or free. So I really grew up with that mindset. And I was able to accomplish a lot of things in a space that was very male dominated. And, you know, when I started at the Air Force Academy, it was, 10 to 12% women. Right. Even by the time I was out in the military, in this space where I was a leader, I was still only 10 to 12%, many times the only woman at the table. And so we are getting to a space, I think now at the Air Force Academy, there's about 30% women that actually start the process. So we're building that bench and seeing people, accelerate the capabilities of what women can do in these industries that I think are just phenomenal. But it was really my dad and the mindset that helped me get to where I was.
Did you go in? I'm always curious. Did you go in saying, okay, I'm going to do this for, 4, 5, 6 years, or did you know it was going to be a 20-year plus career?
I don't think I necessarily set kind of a timeline around my career when I first started. To be perfectly honest, I am someone, and I sense this about you and your family as well. My husband and I are very much this two-pronged way we look at life. I want adventure, right? I want to challenge myself. I don't want to sit in my comfort zone. Like that actually makes me uncomfortable to be too comfortable. So I've always been someone who, if you tell me, no, you can't do that, I will just find a different way to get right to be exposed to these challenges. And I welcome them, right? Like I welcome barriers as challenges, not threats. That's kind of the mindset I grew up with. And then also to the other side of that is I want to find joy, right? I want to enjoy what I do. I want to thrive in the environments I'm in. And so that was kind of where my husband and I just set out on this Air Force career. There were certain things that were like go, no goes for us, which was keeping our family together, which was, I always tell young people today, I like using this phrase. It's called choose your hard, right? Nothing in life is easy. And if you're going to try to find the easy path, you are going to struggle in that course because there never is going to be an easy path. So we always operated in, it's not going to be easy. So let's choose our hard. We anchored on our definition of success for the future, which is enjoying what we do, making an impact, doing hard things and challenging ourselves. And as soon as that was unsustainable for our family dynamic, then one of us would get out, or maybe we both get out. But fortunately, we were able to do the 20-year career. Again, people can look at my life now and be like, oh, they're retirees and life's good. Yeah, but it was a 20-year sacrifice of hard. So choose your hard is kind of the idea.
I love it. I love it. So I've been talking to so many people about this, and actually we were talking to Andy Reese, who I think you probably know as well, amazing guy. And I think there's a lot of talk today about stress being at an all-time high. And I'm not really sure that that's true. I think it might be a little bit that resiliency might be at an all-time low. Because so many times, I know as parents, we strip our children of the gift of adversity. So we try, and we do it from a place of love, but we're trying to make things easy. So I thought it's very interesting that you mentioned choose your hard. But give me your thoughts on the state of the way things are today. Is stress at an all-time high, or is resiliency at an all-time low, or am I looking at it the wrong way?
Honestly, the way that I look at it is distraction is at an all-time high. And what distraction creates is a perception of additional stress in our environment. So I think that, and then I think that's really what the root cause is that we have a society that really anchors in social media, which anchors in our digital devices, which anchors in information being provided at a fast pace that's 24/7. That is highly distracting to the primitive brain that is living in this modern chaotic world, right? And so what our brains normally do, right, it scans the world for threats. And when we are threatened, we go into survival mode. And so back in the day, that threat was a saber-toothed tiger or something that was actually threatening our very survival. But today it's stress, it's social media, it's other people's opinions of us, it's right, like all of that becomes the threats within our environment that distract us from staying focused, that then erode our performance and our resiliency. And really, this is the thing that I think a lot of people don't understand. Stress is a perceived emotion, right? It is our perception of the environment around us, what we're being stimulated by, and then our brain's calculation whether we have the resources to meet the internal demands of the moment. And if we haven't front-loaded psychological skills, which is the bulk of the work that I do today, if we haven't front-loaded with those skills, we will default into survival mode. And then that survival mode, right, it kind of erodes it doesn't put us in the space of adversity. It makes us fall back from it, right, and stay in the comfort zone. So I think that's probably what I see as the root of that perception.
You talk about a couple things that I think are really interesting that I'd love for you to share with our group. It's the concept of mental prehab, not rehab, mental prehab, and psychological flexibility. Tell everybody, what do you mean by those two things?
So what mental prehab is, I was a trained strategist, a military planner. We think about things in terms of, if a crisis happens, how do we get what we would call left of bang, right? Like left of this crisis moment, and plan to either create a new branch that avoids that crisis or better prepares us for meeting that moment. And so what mental prehab is, it's that same concept. How do we front load certain skill sets so that we know we are going to be exposed to psychological and emotional trauma, adversity, and all different aspects of our life? So how can we get left of bang, right? We really focus in our culture on the treatment side of it, right? If you're broken, if you're struggling, let's help you fix it. But what I've really learned is the same skill sets that help you fix yourself are actually the front loading skills. We can build those mental prehab, like that mental strength and mental resiliency. So that's kind of what I mean by this idea of mental prehab and preparation for those moments.
What about psychological flexibility?
So what I mean by that is, here again, as a trained strategist, we know about every plan you prepare, right, always will meet uncertainty, right? Because the enemy gets a say, the other person gets to react, right? Like you can plan and try to control things, but really the only thing you have full control over is your internal environment, not the external one. So what I mean by psychological flexibility is, can I be exposed to something that has uncertainty naturally in it? And can I adjust moment by moment, right, to things as they unfold? I think that's part of what these last 2 years and what COVID demonstrated to a lot of us is that we didn't have psychological flexibility, right? Like when things kind of went in this uproar of like uncertainty and unpredictability, here's the fact: every day of our lives are unpredictable and uncertain. We never know exactly what is going to happen to us. Yet when COVID happened, it just like exacerbated a common occurrence that is just part of life. And we added extra pressure, right, and stress to that environment. And for those people that weren't fully prepared, right, it really manifested in overwhelming amounts of stress. And so when you have psychological flexibility, you just see the moments unfold moment by moment. And then you have the trust in yourself, which there's skill sets to build that so that you can adjust to what happens and actually execute your high performing skills in the moment instead of allowing the pressure to degrade your performance.
Beautiful. And so true. I mean, I always try to look at, when I'm on a podcast, I always get asked, like, what were the last 2 years like? And I'm like, well, they were different, but, so was going through 9/11. So was, all of these other things, financial meltdown in 08, like you could go on and on. And there will be something next. And I think you have to look at it, in all respect to people that lost businesses, lost loved ones. You have to look at it through the lens of, well, this just made me grittier and able to deal with whatever's coming next. Mm-hmm. One of the things that you talk about in your TEDx is burnout. And that's another, I think, hot topic. A lot of people are talking about burnout. what is it? Quietly quitting is the new thing that people say burnout is making people quietly quit. Tell us a little bit about how do you prevent burnout?
So I experienced a burnout about midway through my career. I told you my dad equipped me with some great things.
Yep.
It was just an incomplete strategy because I was in the hustle. And like most of us are, right? And when we're young and when we're like ambitious and we can like get after everything, right? You just kind of find yourself in that space. It really showed up for me as standing there one moment thinking that I had forgotten how to laugh. I described this in my TED Talk where I couldn't even see the love that was right in front of me.
Yep.
And I'm a recovering perfectionist. I don't know if there's any other ones on the call today, but I was so busy trying to be perfect at everything that I did in my life. I forgot that actually growth and learning come from our imperfections and the mistakes and failures we have in life. And so I was lost in this space where I was not living in the moment. I was just living inside my head. And my burnout was actually a manifestation of the thoughts in my head and that feeling of overwhelm. Have you ever, told yourself things like, as soon as I'm done with this big project at work, I will finally take care of myself? Or maybe you say things like, well, I'm in this big leadership position right now, or command, or I'm getting a degree, going through a training program. As soon as I'm done with that, I'll finally pay attention to my family. But what happens is you hit that milestone and then what's right behind it? Like another milestone, you make another deal with yourself. And in the meantime, you're really mind wandering through all the great things in your life that are literally unfolding moment by moment, but you're so inside your head, you don't see them. And so I think that's what's creating burnout in people a lot faster than actually our physical capabilities, even our mental capabilities, is that the distraction toward the narratives that are unhelpful are giving us this sense of unhappiness, burnout, exhaustion that is unsustainable. So that's why I say my dad's strategy, hard work and grit and determination, is only part of the equation. I needed to learn to command my mind and command my thoughts so that I could make better choices around the stress and then how I was performing and adjusting to each moment.
I think one of the things that can prevent burnout is having a sense of gratitude. And I remember the chapter. So Jannell wrote a chapter in my third book, Standing O Salute, which is a book of gratitude for life lessons learned. And she wrote a chapter about unsung heroes that were playing a support role. And I just thought it was a really, really impactful chapter. Tell us a little bit about, what motivated you to recognize those people who are not out there in the front like yourself. And tell us a little bit about that. I thought it was absolutely phenomenal.
Thank you. I have noticed in a lot of spaces within my career, and part of this is because I had a husband who played a supporting role as a maintenance officer in his military career. And I saw repeatedly how, the operators, like the people that are in the front in a lot of different, and this is not just the military career field, in a lot of different spaces, do tend to get the attention, the gratitude, especially in a service-based occupation where you're out there on the line, like, what we would call hacking the mission. But I would not be able to do what I do or what I did as a pilot without this team behind me. And I think having my husband in that role gave me, a better perspective throughout my career around the hard work. Like I show up to fly my plane, but the maintainers had to get there before I got there, right? Like they were doing their jobs. There's a lot of inherent trust that is built within military communities, right? I trust that the maintainers are doing what they're doing to get my plane ready. I trust that the, loaders and air transport folks are getting the cargo on my plane, and my load masters are doing their job, just like they're trusting me when I'm at the controls to be ready and trained and prepared for the mission that I'm responsible for. So I think that's kind of where it came from, that just this perspective that I've always been around with my husband's role in the support world, and truly understanding that it's a shared win when we accomplish things that is not always acknowledged.
Yes, absolutely. So last question before we turn it over to a bunch of folks that have great questions for you is, I think along with mindfulness, you're also an expert on leadership. And I think we're in a little bit of a leadership crisis. And I'd love to get your thoughts on what your advice would be for leaders who are struggling today to keep their teams afloat and to navigate uncertain times. What do you recommend to new leaders that they can do to better themselves?
That's a great question. And I'm going to answer it with one of the pieces of a workshop I teach, which is about knowing yourself to lead others. I think many times when we're thrown into leadership roles, it's just about the lead others piece. And we forget that there's actually 2 steps ahead of being fully capable and prepared to lead others, especially through uncertainty and crisis moments. And you have to know yourself and do the deep, hard, lonely work that no one really wants to do. It's this idea of understanding what are your values, what's important to you, what type of leader do you want to be, how are you going to show up as an authentic person. And if you don't know yourself or understand some of these answers to these questions, you're going to be a leader that's on unsteady ground. Right? Like knowing yourself is like building a foundation that you stand on so that no matter what comes your way, whether it's crisis, whether it's a leadership challenge, you're at least, right? You've got one thing for sure, certain, and that's, who you are and what's important.
Yeah.
So, but it's deep work and it's lonely work. And most of us operate by what I call rules-based thinking versus values-based thinking, because values-based thinking is we've done the work ahead of time. Rules-based thinking is the easy button. We let society or other people kind of tell us what type of leader we should be. And rarely are we aligned when that happens. And when you're not aligned, it's going to show up maybe even to the extreme of toxicity, but at even the best, just an uncertain leader that's facing challenges that creates the storm instead of is the calm in the storm.
Gotcha.
So lead yourself by knowing yourself, right? So you have to do the deep work first. Then you have to lead yourself and know how to show up and be aligned as you. Then the third step is kind of now, how can I be an effective leader for my team from that space?
So I did lie. I have one more question for you. So you've been working with Coach Pete Carroll, and we've had Coach Dick Vermeil, who just got into the Hall of Fame on, and is just an amazing leader. And I would say one of the things that makes him great is his passion. Coach Carroll has had unbelievable success at USC and has had great success with the Seahawks. What do you think makes him a special leader?
Oh, that's easy.
I give you a layup.
Yeah. So the word that I think best describes Pete and my interactions and what I've learned from him is this idea of love and competition. And so he loves and has a passion for what he does, right? And it just exudes in everything anything he touches, anyone he interacts with. But with that love is a healthy dose of expectation around showing up and competing to be your best. And that's what I really love about having learned from him, is this idea that love and competition can coincide in a really magnificent way. And it's not necessarily even competition of like you versus you, it's competition of you versus yourself.
Yeah.
Right. And as a coach, I love you enough, or as a leader, I love you enough to help you explore that, to find out what are the edges of your capabilities. And I'm going to push you, right? Because I love you and I know that there's more inside you. And so I really, used a lot of that philosophy as a leader in the military as well. We do that in a lot of our workshops to help leaders better understand how they can kind of get after finding the best in each individual that's on their team by demonstrating this idea of presence, connection, and ultimately it's love.
I love that inside peek. Thank you. So we're going to open it up for questions. Again, if you have a question, just put in the chat, hey, I've got a question for Jannell. And we are going first to Arizona. Sunny, you are up with Jannell.
All right. Hi, Jannell. Thank you so much for being here today.
Absolutely.
I am a mom to two boys who are 11 and 14. And I think being a kid, you couldn't pay me $1 million to go back through middle school or high school today. And so you not only have that part of their life, right? But then I think our world is just very different with all the distractions. And so I'm curious, what are your thoughts on how we move the line for our kids on all of those distractions that they're exposed to in order to build that mental resiliency?
So I'm going to answer this in two parts. The first part is by our example. We, I think, don't fully appreciate as parents a lot of times how much our children are watching and observing, and how our example in our behaviors, right? Because I talk a lot about thoughts, but ultimately our thoughts drive our behaviors and our actions and our performance. And when we don't have clarity around our thoughts, it's going to show up as stress and overwhelm and, saying or doing things, especially with our children, that we don't necessarily intend, right, for the environment or the stimulus to get us into those extreme spaces. So leading by example is very powerful. And I'm going to kind of show you, I'm going to share an example in my life. You wake up in the morning. If I were to check my phone first thing, right, I might get irritated by a message, an email. I look on social media. I feel inadequate. I go wake up my teenager. She's a little grumpy. Before you know it, at 6:15, I'm already yelling, right? And it really had nothing to do with my interaction with her. It was more that I got agitated by something I saw on my phone that then created some negative thought patterns that then manifested as me getting into distress at 6:15 in the morning, right? Then my son can't find his shoes. Daughter can't find her homework. We get in the car. We're like hitting every red light on the way to school. And that's just another narrative talking point in my head, right? This always happens. And it's all building, right? They're bickering in the back seat. We pull up to school and I say, get out of the car. Oh, but have a great day. And it's 7:30 in the morning and my kids are walking into school like anxious and stressed. And I'm about to go to work anxious and stressed. So what I found is that the first thing is like leading by example is gaining awareness over how this is happening. I'm a big proponent of mindfulness. That's one of the skill sets I teach because I think mindfulness cultivates an overall awareness to where we are and we're inside our stress curve, right? Am I in the good kind of stress, the eustress, where I'm performing at my best? Am I in the bad kind of stress where I'm making emotional overreactions to things? And then once I know where I'm at, I can adjust with skill sets to get myself back, right, to a calm space, a eustress space. And I try to develop skill sets. So for my kids, we now have a new morning routine where I don't check my phone, first of all, so then I don't get agitated, right? I engage with them. We use different type of language. While we're driving to school, we do what's called a mindset reset. There might have been a little bit of chaos before we got in the car, but I don't want them walking into school with that level of stress. So what we do is we take a mindful minute before we pull up to school. And we call it our mindset reset. So we just take a bunch of deep breaths and then we set an intention and have a thought of gratitude. And so that really helps them get out of the car thinking outside themselves, not just caught up in like the drama and the stress. And also what this is doing is this is setting up positive habit patterns for me as the parent, as well as for them, so that they'll grow up to understand the value in creating space and taking deep breaths and the power they have to reset their mind. They don't have to follow their thoughts, especially when they're not helpful ones. So that's kind of how I found the best way, right? Through my example, and then through instilling habit patterns and skill sets.
Yeah, no, I'm a big believer in kind of that caught, not taught. What I find can be challenging is oftentimes our kids look at us like we may be showing that example. And what I find is they hear it very, very different from someone else. Mm-hmm. And it could be, we could say the exact same words, and yet they're hearing it a little differently or receiving it a little differently. And so try to expose them to a lot of different people and the way they communicate. But that's what I always find a challenge, especially kind of through the teenage years is, you know, I can say verbatim this set of words and someone else, friends of ours, can say something and they're like, oh, that's profound. And I'm like, are you kidding me right now? I just said the exact same thing.
You're so right. You're so right. I'm a yoga instructor. I've been teaching yoga for years, and I was trying to get my husband to do it, and no, not interested. And then one day he comes, he's like, "Hey, Men's Health was telling me I should try my yoga. What do you think about that?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh, seriously."
You're like, "That's an excellent idea." I wish I'd have thought of that. Thank you.
It's like those closest to us for sure. You know, my son and I do Headspace together.
Yeah.
And they've got these really every night before he goes to bed, they've got these great animations that share ideas about, hey, when you get angry, this is what it feels like. Or, you know, and then a meditation that, you know, like I've tried to lead meditations with him at night and he has like no interest. But the second we put on Headspace, right, like then he's like, okay, I'm into this. So yeah, you're right.
That's great. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
I love it. I cannot imagine my mom saying we're going to do a mindful minute before I went to school. It was more like the bus is here. And that was it. That was all I got.
Yeah.
We are going to go up to our neighbors in the north, Canada. Wyatt, you're up with Jannell.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, Jannell, I learned so much from what you said already, and Scott asked some great questions that brought this one up for me. And I'll just start it with what I'm having difficulty with, which is what level of honesty I should have with my employees, what level of vulnerability I should have with them about two things: my personal growth and the vulnerabilities of our organization. And the way I kind of want to ask it is a percentage case. You know, is it 100% vulnerability? Tell them everything you can, you know, let them know exactly what's going on, or like 50%, or and I want it from your experience, from you being a leader and having good leaders. What have you found is the most effective way to lead an organization with that kind of vulnerability?
Well, hi, Wyatt. That's a great question. I will say I'm going to lead it with a vague answer, but I'll get more specific. It depends, because I would say you have to be authentic to yourself. Right? So if I were to tell you, you have to be 100% vulnerable, and that is 100% out of your comfort zone, then you're constantly going to be second guessing and questioning everything you do as a leader. Like, am I being 100% vulnerable? And am I not? Like, is this the moment where I am? And that's honestly too much work. Right? Like, it is too much work for you to think as your days roll by as a leader, what type of vulnerability to demonstrate in each different scenario, right? Like, you're going to spend so much time thinking about it. You're not actually going to be an effective leader. So that's why I start off by saying it depends. And by stepping back and understanding like your authentic self of like what looks right for you, because that's what we know about high performers, is that there's this alignment where like when you're on and you feel really good because you're being authentic and demonstrating, right, like your high performance skills in those moments. But when it feels awkward, right, then you know you're kind of like in this off, like that this is not the right path. So there should be some vulnerability, and I think a lot of leaders shy away from that. And so maybe for some of us, we have to work on it a little bit because we tend to not be vulnerable at all. So that's why I would say for that person, it may be huge to open up some vulnerability at like a 10% level. But for someone like me, I have found that authentically, true to myself and my leadership is, we had an airman die when I was a squadron commander. He actually drank himself to death, facing some major adversity. And the talking point in my head was, be strong, like don't show emotion, like just support your team. And as I was telling his friends and they're crumpling on the floor in the moment, like my authentic self wanted to be there on the floor with them, right? And like say, yeah, like I'm going to sit here with you in this moment of sadness, and I'm going to demonstrate that like what's true to me is to be sad and show that vulnerability, even though the talking point in my head said do everything you can not to be. So that's the fight, right? If we're talking and fighting the rules inside our head, it's going to be very difficult to be as authentic. So that's kind of the first part of the answer, right? Like figure out and it takes some work to really figure out like what is true to you by really knowing yourself and exploring that. And then the second space, I think what you're getting after as well is this idea of failure, which can be very hard for leaders. I like to think of failure as this idea of failing forward. Like there's nothing wrong with failure as long as you're moving forward from it and there's a lesson to be learned. If you sit in failure, like as a leader or as an organization, you're going to really struggle. Mm-hmm. But if you use it as like a data point, right? Okay, that didn't work, right? Like how can we pivot? How can we like take this information and build it into something that moves us forward? And I think the fear of failure is very prevalent in a lot of leaders. And as soon as you can kind of clear that noise out of your head, it will also open up space for you to be vulnerable and authentic. I hope that helps.
That does help a lot. What you said about just framing it in a way that moves us forward, at least in some direction, is the perfect way to put it, because it doesn't have to, not everything has to be done perfectly, but as long as it's moving us a step forward, even if it's from a failure, that's the only thing that matters. So that's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. And Scott, you alluded to something in one of the earlier questions about like our culture today and, not taking as many risks. One tool that I used as a leader, I called it No Email Friday. And what it meant was most of Friday, I was out and about with the people I worked with, right? Like learning more about them, like connecting with them, no meetings, no emails on Friday. And I expected all my subordinate leaders to do the same. But you know what I noticed, the backside of that is that it was an empowerment tool because people didn't want to bother me on Fridays to ask me right on email, like, hey, how should we answer this? Or, hey, I'm informing you of that. They just had to make their own decisions. And empowerment, right, and allowing people to do those mistakes and not catch them all the time is how you develop a culture that sees failure differently. Now, the trick is you can't on Monday morning as the leader be like, oh, you guys all messed that up last week when you didn't ask my permission or you didn't fill me in. No, instead you say, okay, like, did we do that exactly like we wanted to? No, but what did we learn, right? And then you use it as a teaching moment or a learning moment. And then that creates this culture around failing forward, empowerment, and risk-taking.
Love it. I would like to implement no email Monday through Friday. That would be fantastic. So I'm on it.
Yes.
Our next question, I don't know what the heck it is, but I know it's going to be a good question. Because John Ruggiero has a daughter at West Point who's crushing it. So from one military academy to the next, John, you are up with the fabulous Jannell.
Great. Hi, Jannell. How are you?
Hi.
It's interesting. I'm listening to your story in the beginning, and it sounds like I've been listening to, I'm like, is this going to be my adult daughter? Is this what's coming on? Because she has all the same qualities you were talking about challenging, and you tell her no and just forget it. And Scott gave some nice props. She's her second year. So she's a yuck at West Point, and she has She actually wants to fly, believe it or not. She actually did air assault this summer and wants to fly. But I guess, and we'll see you, maybe we'll see you or not. We're going to be in Texas for the West Point Air Force game. So you never know. But anyways, my question is this, maybe a little self-serving, but you know, when you were at Air Force, you were a very small percentage of the female population. Now it's a little bit more than it was. I think it's probably 28 or 30 at West Point. Challenges that you see as growing as a leader, especially for someone like that. What did you overcome? And then how did that translate into what you're doing today?
So one of the things I teach in some of my workshops and has come out of kind of the Warrior's Edge work and research we've done with high performing teams is that the number one constrictor of your potential is, you've heard of FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. Is FOPO. The top constrictor for your potential is called FOPO. And that means fear of people's opinions.
Right.
And the more you live inside your head, and especially if you're like an outlier or you're, you know, like a female in like a male dominated profession, FOPO will hold you back, right? You'll always be second guessing your capabilities because you're different, right? And if we sit inside those thoughts, here's the thing about FOPO. The majority of the time, it's what we think other people think of us. There's no truth to it. It's just a creation inside our mind. And what I have found is when I live in that space, and I have in my life, I'm much better at it now. And I wish I would have learned some of these skill sets earlier in my career. But when you sit in that second guessing space, what you're really doing is you are failing to reach out into your challenge and like risk spaces of your life, right? I kind of see like a bullseye, like your comfort zone is kind of the center, and then you have a challenge ring and you have a fear ring, and like, where do you live your life? And if you listen to FOPO, you're just going to be inside that comfort zone. And especially when you're different, you have to step outside your comfort zone, right? Because most of the time, other people aren't inviting you in. Right? Like it gets overrun by the groupthink, by like, you know, these environments, or at least that's been my experience. And so I noticed that I was more risk-taking, more higher performing when I could filter through those thoughts and just focus on the reason why I was doing, or, you know, in these environments, versus being so worried about what other people were going to think when I did something.
Okay. That's good. It's interesting. It's an interesting thought. But she has no boundaries. My daughter has no boundaries, but I've seen some, you know, some of the challenges that are coming up that I can see them being large challenges for her. So it's interesting, but it translates right into what we all do every day in terms of who we manage and who we lead, and in what we can see with when we're developing people within our own businesses. So thank you.
Sure, for sure. And another thing for your daughter, you know, a lot of times we operate in this space where we want to like ask permission. And if she sounds like she's, you know, very similar to having, you know, my kind of grit and determination and mindset, I would always be of the mindset of, well, let me ask for forgiveness, right?
That's
like,
her. No, yeah, that's absolutely her.
Yep. Like bring your own chair. If you're not invited to the table, like I'll just bring my own chair and I'm going to be like, hey, you know, I'm here to contribute. Like I'm here to serve. I'm here to kind of like bring my full self to each moment. And I'm not going to get inside my head about what you think about my presence here. Right. I'm going to anchor on the reason why. And, you know, a great illustration to that, if you haven't read it, I think Scott's familiar. Rolling Stone did an article on some
phenomenal article. Oh my God, so good.
Yeah, if you read that, like it really demonstrates how I led a group of women that actually solved an international crisis, and we almost didn't because no one would listen to us. We were very much dismissed because of like our our newness in the realm of chemical weapons. I was a pilot, right? But I was a strategist and I could think through big problems, but I wasn't a chemical weapons expert. And this was a chemical weapons problem that needed to be solved. And so we were very much dismissed. But luckily we persevered, right? And through an environment that was telling us no, that was telling us we had a dumb idea, that was telling us that it was impossible. Because of, I think, the mindset, because of taking risks along the way, we were ready for this moment. And also because we didn't succumb to the narratives and the voices outside. We just focused on the reason we were doing this mission.
Right.
So
Go back down. Yep. Great. That's awesome. I'm going to have to read that article then. I'm definitely going to have to look it up.
Oh, so good.
Very
So
cool.
good.
Very cool.
Please
Well, thanks.
do.
I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Great talking to you.
Kathy, if you can find the link to that Rolling Stone article and throw it in the chat, that would be phenomenal. Randy Ostrow in Florida, you're up with Jannell.
Hello, hello. Hi, Jannell. Thank you for being here. I have kind of a strange question. Like when I drive, I feel more comfortable driving than most other people. When you now get on a commercial airline or even a private airline, if that's how you fly, how do you feel? Do you feel like comfortable, like you'd rather be flying the plane yourself?
So here is my take on flying. Do you know what I loved about flying in the military is that every day was different. Like I was flying low level, dropping stuff out of the back or people out of the back. I was in Iraq and Afghanistan flying low level, challenging myself. Like we started this whole conversation on like my desire to push boundaries and wanting to do difficult things. Now this idea of just flying an airliner, to me, like that career wouldn't be enough for me personally, right? It's kind of the military flying. It's you're instructing, you're always doing something different. Commercial flying is very much, they hand you everything and it's point A to point B. And it's very, I won't say easy because there's a lot of hard things that come with it, but the ever-changing world of being an instructor and flying in dynamic environments and doing challenging and hard things isn't the same in the commercial space. So for me now, I just sit back and enjoy the fact that I don't have to worry about the weather or, like anything that the plane is doing. And I can actually like get my own work done or just relax on the flights that I'm on. So yeah, that's my mindset now.
Okay, thank you. The reason, just to follow that up for one quick second,
yeah.
I was really wondering if you feel comfortable. In other words, you're now getting on a plane with a lot of other people. You're used to being in a much smaller, weapon, for lack of a better. Are you feeling comfortable letting others fly you through the air because you know how complicated it really is, right? I would think like, wait a minute, like, does this person know what they're doing? And maybe that's crazy. But it seems like, we take for granted how complex flying an airplane is. And because you have an appreciation for it, I was wondering, but you answered it. It seems like you're very comfortable with the whole situation, even as a passenger.
Oh, I'm absolutely comfortable because I also know how well trained all of us that do fly airplanes, like how much training and like job specific skill sets are developed and how many redundant systems are built into our aircraft today that, I do feel completely comfortable flying. And if I didn't, actually it's more dangerous to drive a car, right? Than it is to fly an airplane. So when I get in my Uber, like that might be, or I have my 50-year-old with her permit, that might be that's a little bit more scary.
Okay. Well, thank you for the, little bit out of left field question. I appreciate it.
No worries. I love it.
I love it. We're going to finish up with Eric Brew in Georgia. Eric, you're up.
First of all, thanks, Jannell. And I want to preface this by thanking you sincerely because I'm wondering if maybe my teams might have been the guys you were dropping stuff to on the ground. So as a ground pounder, I genuinely appreciate what you do. But my question is this: as a leader of leaders, right? As we climb the ranks, where I spent 25 years in the military. As a leader of leaders, if you find yourself in a position where you're in an organization that maybe struggles with that culture of trust, or that culture of resiliency. How do you coach leaders to lead their people? What's your top tip for coaching leaders who have to lead leaders through that difficult time?
That's a great question. One of the challenges I think or at least what I have seen, is that leaders of leaders don't understand their leaders of leaders, right? They think they're leaders of followers. And so a lot of times, right, that can manifest as like kingdom building, right? Like I'm not going to help the people below me grow because I don't want them to leave me, right? Because they're supporting my organization or my team and the excellent, space that we're in. And so I think a lot of what I teach is around awareness, because I think the root cause of communication problems that we have amongst leadership teams and follow leaders of leaders, the emotional regulation that does not occur half the time, right? We build and create catastrophes. In fact, the majority of the catastrophes we will all experience in our lifetime, the majority of them will happen only inside our heads. Right? Our minds are powerful, so they'll feel very real, but we will build these catastrophes. We will not be able to emotionally regulate ourselves. And the root cause of a lot of that is awareness, right? We see, and I'm sure you've probably seen this, where leaders see the other leaders as a threat in some way, right? To their leadership, instead of seeing this as my job as a leader is to want you to be me, right? Is to want to create an even better version of me. And so that's probably the greatest challenge I see. And half the time, I will say that most leaders aren't even aware that that's what they're doing, that they're focusing on followership, that they're seeing their fellow leaders as a threat. So that's why I start with awareness, so that we can then understand where are those mind blocks and barriers that then we can like navigate through, and then build the team and support being a leader, a proper leader of leaders.
Thank you so very much. I appreciate your time.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Jannell, this has been amazing. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I'll stay on for a little bit of overtime, but we're going to let you go, Jannell. But as a community, the Outlier Project, we've got about 500 members in 29 countries. What can we do to support you, and what's next for you?
Oh, that's awesome. If it's not evident, I'm very passionate about what I do. I love sharing the message around equipping leaders and teams with empowering tools to front load their psychological health and performance, so that they can not only be high performing, but just thrive in these challenging environments that we're encountering every single day. So yeah, if there's ever anything I can do to help any of your teams, please don't hesitate to reach out. Please connect with me. I would love to hear how your individual journeys, right? I always say, remember, like, know yourself, lead others. So we have to be on the journey ourselves. If you encounter barriers, like before you just give up and say, this stuff doesn't work for me, I can't train my mind, like, please reach out. I'm happy to help. But I love these supportive communities, and thank you for being along in the journey along with me.
Loved it. Loved every second of it. Kathy, take us out, and then we'll hang in for a little bit of overtime.
This is how legends are made. This is how legends are made. This is how legends are made. This is how legends are made.
I love it.
Thank you, Jannell. Thanks again. You're the best. Much appreciated, and hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thanks,
Thank you for
Jannell.
having me. This was great. And I'm honored to have been part of this community for today. So thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Thanks,
Great.
Jannell.
Take care.